My name is Claire Schneider. I'm an ENGin volunteer and a director of a small language school in Santa Fe, New Mexico, in the US. And I'm going to be speaking today about the topic of accent. This is obviously a huge topic and is going to be a challenge to do it any kind of justice in a short period of time, but I'll do my best. I thought I'd start with a very simple definition of the word accent. A distinctive mode of pronunciation of a language. In other words, how we pronounce words. It's also often associated with a certain region, a certain country, or even social class. And it's also something that's very much part of our identity. It's something that is very much part of us, and it develops over time. I think it's fair to say, too, that no two people sound exactly the same. We could say that everybody has an accent. I'm going to be referring to my notes sometimes because I've written down a few things I'd like to share with you in this video. I'd like to start by sharing some of my personal background as well as my professional background because that helps me think about accent in a very broad way. So I was brought up in South Africa and my parents are British. So as a young child and as a young adult, I spent time in the United Kingdom. I also spent more than 10 years in Singapore, where English is widely spoken. And during that time, I was able to visit other English-speaking countries like New Zealand and Australia. I also spent a bit of time in India, where it was fascinating for me to hear the people from that country interact with each other in English as the lingua franca. So I've had a lot of experience in my personal life interacting with many different kinds of native speakers. And then in my professional life, I obviously have encountered many learners of English. And something that is quite interesting to note is that when I'm in the United Kingdom, people think I'm American or South African. When I'm in South Africa visiting my family, people think I'm American. And when I'm in the US, people generally think that I'm British. But the one thing in common is that everybody generally understands me. And if they don't, I might modify my accent slightly. For example, when I first moved to the US, people couldn't understand the way I was saying my name. I said, my name is Claire. So quite sort of airy, and it has an airy finish to it. And so people here would ask me to repeat it 2 or 3 times. And then sometimes they would ask me to spell it. Once I spelled it, they said, oh, Claire. So now I say my name is Claire, and I make sure to pronounce a soft R at the end so that it's easier for someone to understand what I'm saying. I'd also like to take a few minutes to pose a few questions for you to think about. There's no right or wrong answer. It's more just something for you to think about. And the first one is, a non-native speaker accent makes a bad impression. What do you think about that if you're going for an interview? Is that something that you think about? Nowadays, there's so much global acceptance of different accents. Before, the British accent or the American accent used to be considered the gold standard. But now everyone recognizes that there are so many different accents within those two umbrellas that it's difficult to understand what someone even means when they say, I'd like an American accent. There's actually a video you can Google, and it's titled something like 50 Accents of the United States. And you can hear someone from each state saying something. And there's something similar for the accents of the United Kingdom. There's one that I show students often that looks at where you can listen to 17 different regional accents, and they are vastly different. It's actually quite surprising how many regional accents there are in a small country like the United Kingdom. But of course, it very much is due to the fact that the UK is a much older country, and people have migrated there from so many different parts of the world, and that has caused the development of these very specific regional accents. So perhaps if we have our own accent, our own unique accent, and we present with that in a confident way, perhaps it makes us more interesting. Something to think about. The second one is, I need a native speaker to imitate so my speech sounds natural. What do you think about that statement? It's actually not a bad idea to try and imitate a native speaker, not necessarily with the goal of sounding exactly like them all the time, but to follow their rhythm, their intonation, what vocabulary are they using, what aspects of their accent do I want to imitate and possibly copy. You can do that using the technique of duet reading or shadow reading, or just really watching a lot of, say, American movies where you will encounter many different kinds of American accents, and you might adopt some of those aspects into your own accent. The third one is, I want to sound like a native speaker. I wonder if that's realistic. How much time do you think it might take to achieve that? And how doable is it, given that we start to develop our phonological awareness at birth and it changes over time, but it becomes more difficult to change and adapt as we get older due to an area in our brain called the Broca's area, which filters all the sounds that we hear from birth. And the last one, is it easier to be internationally intelligible than to learn to speak English like a native speaker? I think this concept of being internationally intelligible is really important, and it's actually one that I adopt for myself. As I mentioned, people interpret my accent differently depending on who I'm speaking to. But my goal is always that people can understand me fairly easily without it taking up too much effort on their part. And so, is that perhaps a more realistic goal than trying to sound like a native speaker, especially considering the fact that there are so many more non-native speakers in the world of English than there are native speakers? So I'd like to leave you with that thought about becoming internationally or globally intelligible. So those are just a few things I wanted to share with you today. And as I mentioned, there are interesting videos online. This is a huge topic. If you're interested in exploring it further, there are many resources online that you might find interesting. I hope it's been helpful and provided you with some food for thought.